My name's Dani Valent, and I feel really weird talking into a microphone that doesn't work. Like I might as well be singing into a hairbrush. There we go. Yes. All right. Yeah, how good is it to be at GrAiNZ? Because I wasn't here yesterday, I have to soak up 2 days worth of joy in one day, but I think I'm on track. I think it's happening. So I can't imagine how good all of you feel. I am a food journalist. I eat a lot of baked goods, and I'm very happy to drink beer as well, but I am not a baker or a brewer, nor a farmer, but I appreciate the efforts that go into those crafts, those industries, and the incredible joy that they bring. And I'm thrilled to be part of GrAiNZ. So I'm moderating this panel, and our topic is celebrating diversity in food systems. I think when we're talking about grain in a beautiful, holistic, deep, earthy sense, then we really are definitely celebrating diversity. It almost goes without saying, except it does need to be said, because as we know, we can easily become disconnected from the joys of diversity in food systems. And I guess we can also become disconnected from the joys, the benefits, the richness of diversity in our human systems. And so I reckon we've got such a rich field to play in this discussion. So I've got bios on each of you, but I reckon it's better if you introduce yourselves and maybe talk a little bit. Let's just kick off by talking about, this word diversity. What does it mean to you? So should we just go in a random order? Miin, shall we start with you? Can you introduce yourself? And I will be passing the microphone.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Miin. I'm really happy to be here with everyone, and thank you to the wonderful organisers for having me. So I am currently doing a PhD on fermented foods and gut health with Kate Howell, who isn't here, but she is here somewhere. And so to me, my thinking about diversity really started with when I studied permaculture, and then when I started a fermenting business, you can't avoid thinking about diversity when you're working with microbes especially. And then also the diversity of people that I would meet and work with. And I think another topic that we've talked about exploring here is the diversity of the things that we need to do to sustain ourselves in businesses and in family life. There's that sort of diversity, and how do you balance all of that? So, I think whether we go from a microcosm to a macrocosm, diversity is what helps us to survive as a species on this planet, really. So yeah, so I'm really here as someone who's worked in food systems and is still working in food systems. But I'm, also like Dani said, I'm not a baker or a brewer, but I appreciate everything that people who work in these industries do, because it's really amazing. So.
And in the celebration of the randomness of diversity, pass the microphone to whoever you feel like.
Cool.
I'm Courtney. I'm one half of Woodstock Flour, and we're in Rutherglen, Victoria, on Bangarang country. I guess I'm really interested in diversity from a grain perspective and soil diversity, and building biodiversity through our farm. But what's been interesting as I've been learning, on this agri-ecological journey, is learning about how the regional communities I'm involved in are quite homogenous, and the farmers that I'm getting to know through my work and through the flour mill that we run are often male and older. So I'm interested in how I can support more women to be coming into the farming space, and how we can have more young people and people from diverse backgrounds getting involved in GrAiNZ, because we can't have a diverse grain economy without diverse people, a diverse community of people behind it. And we also need to be producing food in a way that's culturally appropriate for our diverse communities.
Yeah, nice one, Court.
My name's Emily. I'm originally from South Australia, recently moved to Victoria, to the Mornington Peninsula, and I've been involved in food production in various ways all my career as well. And most recently in the last 16 years it's been sourdough bread baking, and in the last 6-7 years it's been from the grain journey all the way through milling into baking. And for me, all the way through my career to do with food, diversity has meant inclusivity. It's been anti-exclusion. Often in the food industry, people try to silo everything. There are experts that tend to exclude people that perhaps come from another type of background, cultural, or they look different, or they produce food that isn't the most commonly eaten food in a particular city, and so things get excluded. So I've always tried to bring in other approaches to using raw ingredients. So that's what diversity means to me, is including as many different options as possible in food.
Hi, I'm Gab. I'm co-founder with Chris of Sailor's Grave Brewing. So brewing is a very non-diverse kind of industry. It's mostly white male with beards. But what I love about what we do in our industry is, our background is photography, landscape architecture, then we had a restaurant and bar in Sydney. So we come to brewing and that industry from a really different kind of space. Like, we work with botanicals and farmers, and we're always trying to create something new within a pretty homogenous kind of industry, really. So that's what excites me about our industry, and also just standing up and being a woman in our industry, because sometimes it's really easy to just sit back and be in the background, but you just have to continually step forward and say, hey, I'm here, I'm a woman, and yeah.
Yes, love it.
I'm Maaryasha, and I have Zelda Bakery, and I suppose diversity, well, the first thing is, I guess, expressing your culture through your food. And I guess when you grow up, I grew up Orthodox Jew, which is and a small sect of that. So just by default, you are different to the people around you, but owning that and being proud of it and sharing it. And so using, diversity in food, being able to connect to different people's cultures and backgrounds through what they're making. So the more interesting little bakeries there are, I think the better. I think people can learn a lot about the history of the world and things like that. Also, apparently, I missed the talk, but my sourdough starter was analysed, and it's the most diverse out of all of them. I don't know if that's bad or good. Jason says it's good, and I trust Jason. It could be... Oh, Kate, I didn't see you. Yeah. It has the most amount of different bacterias. And also... Yes. I'm not talking... That's not my... I'm not. And also diversity, taking the stuff that we grew up with and making it a lot more interesting using diverse flours is something that also really excites me, and knowing where our food comes from and working closely with people like Jason and what people like Courtney are doing, that's improving the diversity of people's palates and food systems and things like that. Yeah, which is really exciting, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. Will you welcome our panellists? Panels are funny things, aren't they? I could have a list of questions and topics and go through each of you turn by turn, but I reckon in the spirit of diversity and shaking things up, maybe we should do it a little bit differently. And I'm just going to mention a couple of things that you sparked for me with your introductions, and let's just see what happens. So one thing I thought of was, I think from what you were saying, Courtney, about diversity in farming. United African Farm is a farm that's just started on the outskirts of Melbourne, and I was on a panel with a bunch of academics, including the guy from United African Farm, whose embarrassingly name I can't quite remember at this moment. He was also a youth worker. So he spoke about starting this farm as a way of feeding his community, getting those culturally appropriate foods that people missed and that made them feel like they were anchored and made them feel like they were home. But it was also an outreach. So it was also about sharing culture, like enriching people who didn't know about what they were eating, cassava and whatever it was. So it was instantly this sort of two-way process. So there's that. And the other thing that sparked was just thinking about sitting in this more academic setting, and Miin, this might be something you want to pick up on. There's a lot of explicit programs and intentions in some of those more academic or government worlds that are about inclusivity and about, noticing implicit bias. And I just wonder if any of you might have something to say about if that could be applied to this more disparate world where a lot of people are really buried in their own businesses or deep in the soil on their own farms. Is there anything that we could take from those other worlds? Why are things so different? Is it that, I don't know, is farming behind academia? Is academia made much too woke? What's going on?
I think access to land is at the heart of all of it in terms of diversity in the farming landscape. There's a whole amount of privilege behind a lot of the big Australian farms. And I don't think we acknowledge that down the other end, at the end, the user scale of things. And I'm really excited by these kind of, that farm that you were talking about, because I think we forget that. I've probably said this before, so I apologise. But if you think about the word agriculture, agri means land and culture is people and community. And I think in a lot of ways our agriculture is just ag now. It's just all about, it's just land. And if we can't address access to land and allow more communities to farm and to produce the foods that they want, then it has repercussions all the way down, right down to the end.
I think on that, we had a really great talk by Gabrielle Gattei earlier, just after lunch, about mentorship, and there was an interesting point made about future leadership in kitchens and how that's changing and how it's not such a hierarchical structure anymore. And I think in possibly farm ownership, there needs to be the same kind of restructuring of, even if there's lack of access to land for diverse groups of people, employees and co-management, sharecropping, those kind of structures can be made more accessible to a whole lot of people. And perhaps that's what needs to follow on from kitchens and perhaps academia as well. Is leadership structures really need to change, and there needs to be better support from government too to assist a lot of the the agronomists training, agricultural science training, that kind of thing, just to bring in and encourage a whole lot more diverse faces into agriculture and food.
Yeah, I agree. I guess something I might add is that I think it needs to all be done in concert with a diverse group of people and considering their culture, but also what happens to diaspora when they come here. So this is probably a huge generalization, but I would say that many people of Chinese culture who come from, could come from Singapore or Malaysia or China. I think that as first or second generation, parents would not be like, we want you to go farm. They would be like, oh, that's shameful. Or, especially if we came from communist China, it would be like, we were forced to do that, right? So I think that's where you have to be sensitive to those issues and start to have big conversations about that. And then also just within those communities, starting to promote a different way of thinking about some of these, say agricultural. And I mean, I think, and Kate would know a lot about this too, but I feel like within our faculty there's been a lot of wonderful international students who approach agriculture from different ways as well. And some of them stay, some of them leave, but I think that's one of the benefits of academia is that it does attract people from diverse backgrounds because Australia has such a good track record with education. And those conversations that happen in that context are really helpful as well to build more diverse people in farming and agriculture. And, yeah.
I'm not sure what really I can add, but I do agree with what Courtney said about, access to land. So where Albury is rural, it's in Orbost, it's Far East Gippsland. So you basically, young farmers just cannot buy land, and you basically have to wait for people to die. And also the problem is the scale of that land. I love what they're doing in some areas of Scotland where the government is buying back land and cutting it up into smaller things. So when farming gets to a scale, it really locks a lot of people out, and it locks diversity in that smaller area. So if we had a natural disaster, which we've had, we would literally starve where we are because there is no diversity of food being grown. It's all dairy and beef. No one's farming how they were 50 years ago in our area. So I would love to see a lot more breaking up of these large parcels of land in these rural areas so younger people can get in and start farming and feeding that small area.
I really don't have anything to add about all of it, but so I don't. What you said about immigrant culture and how farming is not something that's valued. It's also the same, I think, for my immigrant culture. A little bit like a baker is kind of not. I was a physio and I went to uni, and so I think that a lot of our work is also changing the face of bakers. It was definitely a man's world, definitely considered uneducated, rough. And I think a lot of the new bakers are, changing what a bakery was, also making them more friendly and more women-friendly. Old school, I wouldn't ever want to work in an old school bakery with, so that reminded me of that. And I think, and even when Jess, she's doing the talk now, so she's not here, White, I don't know, she came and dropped the flour off on Friday, and she's this strong woman. She milled all the flour and then she drove it down and then she dropped it off. I was like, this is amazing. When do you see that? I enjoy, I think that's also really important. And also changing hospitality in general, making it more better place for women than it was,
And I think women are leading that. I mean, they really are doing that. And and I think I remember talking to Rosa Mitchell, and she was talking about how she organized. I don't know if everyone knows who Rosa Mitchell is, but she has a restaurant in Melbourne, and she's Sicilian, but she talks about how she organized her kitchen and how she made it there's no hierarchy. It's kind of flat, and everybody does a bit of everything. Everyone will clean the floor, she'll mop the floor, and it's because that's not naturally, but that's how women have functioned in other spaces. It's once it comes into the restaurant space, it's I don't get this very hierarchical, and I'm not trying to be, too binary about roles, but it's masculine, the escoffier, the sort of hierarchical way of doing things, but women just naturally come in and go, no, this doesn't make sense. We want everybody to be community and to feel appreciated as an individual, but work well in the team. And I think that kind of diversity of thought coming into hospitality is really, I'm sure that's kind of what you're doing at your bakery too, right?
I think we're all
Oh, everyone.
No, I think we're all challenging a lot of that, yeah. Whether it's like in our personal families or like in the community or in general, yeah. And I think overall you're making your environment like more inclusive just by pushing it, yeah. But it's also interesting because in the kitchen, due to so many visa issues, actually they're the most diverse places. But what you're talking about is when it comes to actually making the product, it's the least diverse. Yeah, there's so much rich culture in the back of the kitchen that I think we also need to keep working on celebrating as well. Yeah.
So a couple of things that sparked for me. One is about hospitality, which is the world I'm engaged with, you know, day to day. And it's a lament of a lot of senior figures, men and women, that it isn't a career that's honoured, that families and careers counsellors push people towards. I remember speaking to one person who had ended up becoming a chef, but when they spoke of their interest in food and cooking at school, they were directed into like sports science or something. So it was like the very last thing that you should steer a kid towards is a career in the kitchen. So I guess it keeps you know, some people who would bring something different to that world out of it. A lot of people find their way into kitchens like, you know, a bit later in life after another career or studying something. They were the good kid and went to uni, and then they just couldn't help but cook. And I think, you know, perhaps that resonates with you, I'm sure, Maaryasha, and you, Gab, and yeah, perhaps the rest of you. So I guess there's that, like, are you already doing that work of bringing honour and prestige to these fields in a way? So maybe that's a question. And then something else about scale also sparks, like when you talk about these vast farms where I think they sort of lean towards monoculture and, you know, big machines and single crops and, you know, less diversity. Is it possible, do you think, to do things at scale, or is it necessary to do anything at scale? You know, should all the farms be chopped up? Should all the bakeries be micro bakeries? How do we fit a lot of small things into this big messy world?
Do you guys want to say? So since we're talking about diversity, I think there has to be diversity of scale as well. Like I would never be like, okay, we got to throw out all the big farms. Because, you know, if you think about it, that level of agriculture developed because we needed to feed more people. And we wouldn't be where we are now. People would have just starved to death, you know? And I think that ultimately there's definitely a place for small farms. Agreed, totally. But again, I'm sure you guys... It's like farming is hard. Not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody can do it. So we got to have the diversity of different options, you know. But definitely we need land for more small farms. I mean, I totally agree with that because there's more people who want to do it, you know. Courtney, do you have anything to say on that? I'm sure you do.
I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you. I think a diversity of scale and, yeah, just I don't know what you were saying about diversity in the kitchen. Like, I think that is very much true in some regional areas of Australia as well, but they're not like considered the face of food production, which is so interesting. Like in Shepparton, for example, where there's a massive migrant workforce in horticulture, and they're just not like kind of acknowledged as being, the face of farming in Australia. And I think I have experienced, like, what do you call it, imposter syndrome or whatever, like not feeling, and you were doing this as well, Maaryasha, like not calling yourself a baker, not calling myself a farmer, and I think it's because we like hold these prejudices ourselves of who is that person and what do they look like. The
thing that I thought of when you were talking about scale, I agree with diversity of scale. I think there needs to be all kinds. A lot of it also is to do with the productivity of the land and how far you are from your market. And sometimes you just have to have a big property to be able to get the product out, to get the yield out. But one thing that can happen with a really big anything that's producing something and selling it is there's a lack of attention to detail. Yeah. And you need people involved who stop and look at the minutiae and just notice things And often it happens to be a woman,
Yeah.
happens to be somebody who just goes for a walk and just has a really close look at what's going on and comes back, and they need to be listened to, and they need to be paid attention to, and things need to be picked up on, and that's the same in a bakery or a kitchen or a brewery or any kind of production facility. You need all kinds of sets of eyes as well, and respect for those sets of eyes.
Sorry, Dani, I just want to ask this question. What do you think the role of technology might be? Like, we're talking about diversity of who is working on a farm. Like, what do you think the role of technology might be, and pros and cons?
Good question.
That's a really big question. We definitely consider technology in all of our farming and milling operations, but it's a question of cost and are we losing connection with our community if everything is, we want to be hiring people and we want to work with people at its core. At the core of our business, we want it to be centred around people, and so I think, that's definitely something that we consider. But I'm not sure if I'm answering it in the way that you're...
Like, the type of jobs will change if more technology comes in.
Yeah.
Like there won't be jobs, they're just different kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
I just wonder, I know what you're saying, but no, you can't get your answer.
I don't, like, in terms of, like, physical labour as well, I think that's definitely not an issue for me, like my husband definitely lifts more bags than he should, but like we make sure everything is as ergonomic and as human scale as we can. And we just advertised a job the other day, and only women applied, which I was like quite excited by. That like these women were happy to like get into this. This job that they probably know nothing about because there's no flowers around. But something that I've been thinking about and talking about with a few women friends who are farmers is like there's no maternity leave on farms when you run, and if you're running your own business as well, like there's no maternity leave. So like that's a massive challenge, and something that I've been dealing with the last 5 years is like raising children on farms is kind of dangerous at times. Like it's very romantic, of course, but it's also really, really hard. As I'm sure you could all say for all of the industries that you're in. And so I think that's something that's never addressed by government, is how, farmers and primary producers are supposed to raise families in this environment.
Gab and Maaryasha, perhaps I'd love you to talk about how you fit life in and around your businesses. And it's interesting, Gab, and you also, Maaryasha, like thinking about Courtney advertising for a job and women applying, like that's really fantastic. That's really exciting. Do you find more women or men applying for jobs that you advertise? And is it something that you think about when you advertise?
I think you had a lot of women apply because you can only be what you can see, and they saw you, so that's probably why they applied for that job. No, we don't get a lot of women applying for our jobs, and there is a lot more female brewers these days, which is great, but getting them to move all the way to Orbost is another thing. But I try to, like, every day foster women in our own business. If it's not just brewing, then other things that in our business and in other businesses in our area as well, like, mentoring other people and just like offering encouragement, just like, just do it, just step off. And sorry, I got a bit lost in the question.
And just also, this idea of, kids on a farm, kids in a brewery.
Kids and breweries do not mix. Like if you look at our social media, our stories, it's always kids on the school holidays, like in areas that they couldn't be doing or shouldn't be. But I put them to work packing boxes and doing all those things. But it is a constant struggle, and luckily for us, like we live on a property with my parents, so we have a little village. You know, it takes a village to raise a family. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, Courtney, with the children on a farm being dangerous, because I think that was the hardest thing of my whole life, was having a bakery with little children. And then people on Instagram, because we all came, like, I know it's really embarrassing, but everyone came a bit from like the Instagram world. The GrAiNZ is a little bit kind of through that. And there's so much, like there's baking with my kids and it looks so pretty, and it's really not pretty, and it's so hard, and it's very hard when you're very driven and excited and you want to produce and do all this stuff, and then you just have like little children that are just need you so much. And I had to learn to create strong boundaries because the bakery started at home, because they used to come in the bakery, and then someone came into the bakery who had grown up in a bakery, and he was like, you can't have kids in a bakery. I know it looks cute and stuff, it's very, very dangerous. And I had to put very strong lines with that. And even now when the kids come in the bakery, I kick them out straight away, because you never want like a hot oven near a child and stuff. I think it was the hardest thing at home. Yeah, trying to do what you want to do. And so many men, we don't have wives, you know, and so many men have the wives that enable them to... And also it's a skill that's really admired in the man's world, to work a lot. Like if a man works kind of part-time, especially, I think everywhere, it's very... people kind of judge them badly, but when a woman works and is driven and wants to keep doing stuff, everyone's like, well, who's looking after your children? Yeah. It's really hard. And I think I felt really alone, especially because on Instagram people make things look so different than how they are. And I had so many moments when I was trying to do stuff and the kids were there and I was like, this is so hard. I think the best thing about, it's been good not working from home anymore. And it does take a village, and it looks different for everybody as well, the village.
So, what about the advertising for jobs? Employing people.
I haven't. We're still young, I guess. So hasn't been. It's a little more loose the way ours has evolved. It's like progressed, and I think it's right now kind of half-half. Also, because I am a woman, I was totally limited. You know, I was baking a lot when I had little babies, and I really hurt myself. So I had to stop lifting. So I need also the diversity of strength in the bakery. And because there are pregnant women and you want to support that, and they can't be doing the heavy lifting of the sacks and stuff. So I do actually like having some young guys in the bakery that can do all the lifting. Yeah, unfortunately. But not unfortunately, but I mean, I wish... We love young guys. But I wish we could all do everything. But we have, I think, diversity in a bakery and in anywhere in brew and stuff, you also have to find people's strengths and weaknesses and work with that. Yeah.
It's so interesting that you say, I wish we could all do everything, because maybe actually the point is that we shouldn't want that. Yeah. And we should celebrate the things that we can't do, and because that gives us a reason to reach out and connect. I think asking for help, it's so hard as a woman running a business, to admit that vulnerability is really challenging. And something that you guys just sparked for me was I've interviewed a lot of so-called celebrities. I don't ever really get starstruck, but the only time that I was just beside myself was when I interviewed an astronaut. So the only Australian astronaut, Andy Thomas, and I was just like, so is anything you're wearing been to space? It was like, I don't know, maybe my sunglasses. I was like, oh. Anyway, I had to do a follow-up interview with him by phone, and I was breastfeeding at the time, and it was the phone call came through at an absolutely impossible time, and I was like, could I call Mr. Thomas back? No, that won't be possible. From NASA, whatever. So it was like, okay, so recorder, baby, astronaut, and I just remember listening back to that recording when I was transcribing and just hearing the sucking of my baby, and I was like, this is just so freelance mum life. But yeah, somehow somehow you get through. Yeah, interesting.
I think that the way that it's that pull that you feel where you want to be doing one thing but you want the other also relates to like the prejudice we have about ourselves, where you picture a person like an interviewer or journalist not having a baby on them. But if there was more people that had babies on them, then it would be something that's like, it's another way that you can just be...
Professional.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of professional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like, imagine being able to do that.
Well, I think COVID actually, that's one thing that COVID and the lockdowns and all that stuff, as hard as they were, that's one benefit. You guys probably remember this video. This guy was being interviewed on BBC or something, and then the kids come in, and then the wife like creeps in and she tries. And you know, back then everyone was like, "This is so funny. This is like broke the internet. It's like hilarious." But now it's like so normal because of working from home, and so like people are just, and I think especially for men, like, you know, my husband has always worked from home, but it's kind of like now men can actually understand that the kid will come in and disrupt what you're doing and accept it as well. So there's a lot more acceptance. But like it's what you're saying, that there needs to be the realization that this is real life and we have to make that work within our work, right?
Otherwise you're excluding like a lot of people. Right. Yeah.
I feel like some of you guys in the room might have some questions to put to our awesome panellists. Does anybody have anything that they want to ask right now, or just start thinking about questions? Okay. I think we've talked about some really like big topics, but I'd love to also get really micro and talk about something, I don't know, little diverse things that you love, like Gab, whether it's particular flavour, like a flavour that you've put into, you're doing, or Courtney, maybe a particular, I don't know, grain or little micro season, or Emily, you might have something that you're particularly loving working with. Does anyone want to pick that up?
Oh, yeah. What I love about, I guess, things that we've done is using different yeasts, to not just ale yeast, but like we've done a lot of beers in the last couple of years using like wine lees, so the leftover product for making wine, and fermenting completely on that, and but also using sake lees from Sharon at the fermentary, and it's an absolute roller coaster. Every time you use these different yeasts in the beer process, you never know what's going to happen. And that's what's really exciting for me in beer, is using different yeast sources.
What's a favourite beer that you've made out of it?
The sake lees beers.
I had that.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, and they're always completely different and sometimes very, very sour. But we started to kind of mitigate that sourness with the use of hops as well. But they're definitely my favourite beers. Actually, a number of years ago we used the sourdough starter from Michael James, and that was one of our favourite beers that we've ever done. Like the flavour in that was really, really beautiful.
Sorry, I just ask you one more question. Like, how do you balance that adventure with commercial sense?
Yeah, I don't know. We're in our 7th year now, so Chris is a very good brewer, and but the brewing process is definitely artistic endeavour that we do together. So sometimes I'll come up with a really crazy idea, and that's the master of him being able to like bring that to reality. Sorry, what was the question?
No, you answered it. It works.
And we just trust ourselves now, and I mean, they're 2,000 litres, it's not that huge, but we do a lot of, like we do a new special release every 2 weeks, sometimes every week. So, we just throw caution to the wind and just trust our gut now. And there's a lot of steps along the way where you can kind of control the process. And we've only probably had 1 or 2 batches in the whole 7 years that we've had to dump.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? What was your biggest fail?
Oh, God. Our biggest fail, I guess, is sometimes...
No, the flavour. No, not like just the different flavours of beer. Yeah, just the fail, not like an actual.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, like an experiment that went very wrong.
Oh.
You didn't like the taste of it.
Oh.
You just said you had
Nothing really. Just if the colour doesn't come through, or if so you have an idea at the beginning and then you go through the whole process and you've put something on the label and it doesn't 100% live up to what the customer will believe is in the beer. Like if it doesn't have the right colour, or if it doesn't have the huge punch that they're expecting. Yeah, probably just that.
I think that everyone on this panel has done a lot to educate the public and the possible audiences for their different products about diversity of taste too. So it's kind of like you said, you make very different, you do like the special brews, right? But that's educating the public too, that we can't always get this exactly consistent product because we're using a different technique. Or when I was doing my drinks, like you're using wild fermentation. So, but people when I first started, there was only one kombucha company, and people were like, what is this product? But now people are like, oh, that's okay. Like, it might not be exactly the same as I got it last time, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think so with Court and with your flowers, like here's Rudy who spoke before, he said Rosella flour is a really old grain that's been around, but you've educated people but it tastes great, and let's get that back into circulation. So I think that's the other thing, is educating the public about diversity of options and taste, and also that inconsistency can be a good thing. Yeah.
You guys want to talk about the lyric?
I was just thinking about flavours. I was thinking about how at Turong we work with both population wheats, which are a crowd, a crowd of different cultivars that have been intentionally crossed at some stage, and then they've been allowed to adapt into the local area. And we also work with single cultivars, and we also work with a couple of mixtures. But they definitely, when you've got a population wheat flour, I always think of the flavours being like a rainbow. There's just a lot of complexity and a lot of different kind of colours that you see that you taste. And then when you've got a single cultivar that perhaps has been grown in a couple of different sites, you get more a gradation of the same colour. So it's sort of a different way of appreciating the bread. This is me. I just love this stuff. So it's a bit weird, but it's just a nice way of thinking about a staple like bread or pastry is how the flavours are coming through. So that's just what I was thinking about with diversity. There's different kinds.
Yeah, I'm probably interested in that as well, but we love baking at home with our flours. I think we've got 6 different varieties that we're working with, but it's really exciting to feel like we've nailed it at home. We've worked out how to bake with a certain flour and how to do a number of things, but then we talk with our bakers and they just blow it all out of the water and tell us to do something differently, or they show us a whole new avenue of looking at this particular variety, which is really exciting. But then what I also love about our business is that we can be farming and we can be milling, which is the same as you and Jason, just that diversity of being able to be outside, moving animals, putting in a crop, monitoring soils, but then, getting dirty in the flour mill. And I just love the diversity of our, it's stressful and it gets out of control sometimes, but I, for the most part, really like the diversity of our work.
Do we have any questions? Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how we increase the diversity of the end consumers of our products. I feel for all the things we do to involve diverse ingredients and diverse people in our workplaces, we're probably right at the, particularly maybe socioeconomically. We have a diversity of cultures, yeah, maybe, but socioeconomically we're making expensive products, and how do we get them to probably the people who need nutritious products the most, really?
I'll just summarise your question for the recording. Thank you. It's a really fantastic thing to talk about. So how do we increase the diversity of our customer base, particularly socio-economically?
I'm not going to answer the socio-economic because I feel like you guys, I don't know, maybe. The problem with the food that, well, I'll just say the problem with the slow food is that it takes a lot of labour or equipment or things like that. And also with the less of people like Courtney and Emily and more of like the big farms, they have the monopoly and they have like massive buying power and things like that. So they've created an imaginary price on food in the supermarket. But I think that what you were saying, like, I think that the reason why you get to try all these different beers and people still buy them is because they trust you. Yeah, and I think that when you build, like, are a little baker, you have the benefit of having a trust between you and the customer. And I know that, and I'm like amazed that it happens all the time, but whatever we try, like, because we have this fun thing where we do different flavour knishes all the time with different collaborations and stuff, and I'm just amazed they just get sold straight away. Like, no one, I'm like, they don't even know anything. I think if you build trust with your customer, then you get to showcase like like we love celebrating the different cultures in the bakery. So yeah, I think the trust is really important, and the trust enables you also to explain the price to your customers, as well. And I know for our low socioeconomic customers, I said, like, I do little deals and stuff like that, but that's on a very micro scale.
There is something, I've seen some models in the US, mutual aid. So it's where you might offer shares to people who can afford it to like pay a little bit more or buy a share in what you're going to do specifically. So to then give for free to, say, lower socioeconomic groups and things like that. So there are, I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect system because these are huge systemic problems that, you know, are all connected to each other, but we can't fix, you know. But yeah, mutual aid is something that some people do in business context.
I think structurally it's just impossible for people on our scale to address their socioeconomic issue because everything's against the labour cost that goes into our product. I'm an employee now, I want to be fairly paid, so I'm not going to encourage my employer to reduce the price of the end product because I want to be fairly compensated. I want the farmer, I want everybody to be fairly compensated. But the one, I think it has to come from government. I think it really has to be a structural systemic change from up way beyond us. And we've got to demand that. And so the way we can kind of encourage that change of thinking on a policy level is we get involved in grassroots community education and we go into our schools. Perhaps, you know, that's the generosity that we can show in our community is we have school groups come through and we give them ideas of how other things can be made at home from our flours or using our breads or our any of the products that come out of our businesses. And we sort of start from the grassroots and we kind of created a new generation of kids that grow up and they demand, you know, better food system. But yeah, I just think that bigger scale, those massive problems, we can't do anything other than create change in our own context.
I think what you're talking about is food literacy, which I think is really, food literacy is really important too. But that's where it starts, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I really agree, Emily. Like, it's massive, it's systemic. Like, yeah, need a revolution basically. But we could start with universal basic income. We could start with like canning those obscene tax cuts that are coming. Yeah, like there's a lot of different choices that we could make as a society about how we spend money and what access we give to people, what funds we give access to people to spend on great bread and great beer, because, yeah, it should be accessible to all. I reckon we've got time for one question before we move on, if anybody else has something they would like to have addressed. Or we must have, oh yeah?
It's not really a question, it's more just an acknowledgement of all of the women who stand by the male farmers that we come across in our work. The woman on the farm's role is so important, and most men, when you ask them about most farmers I've spoken to will always sing the praises of their wives because of all of the work they do to make that farm happen. So kudos to all the Australian farmers and their wives. Or vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Kudos to the farmers that recognise the value of perhaps unpaid labour.
Just a comment on the comment. I think the thing that we all do and can do for the lower socioeconomic people and their futures is teach. So whatever you're doing, like it's bringing someone into your business and teaching them, it's like you're taking it out further. It's a longer game, but I think that's really part of what makes the world work and go around.
Yeah, absolutely. Making those connections, and you just the power of teaching and learning is you just never know where it's going to lead. Yeah, beautiful. Well, I think let's leave it there. Will you join me in thanking Courtney, Emily, Miin, Gab, and Maaryasha?